Well, thank you everyone who is joining us and those who are still going to be joining us in a few minutes. I'm Jesus Martinez. I'm the Executive Director of the Central Valley Immigrant Integration Collaborative. And part of what we do in collaboration with partner agencies is schedule informational webinars that can be of value, of usefulness to the partner organizations that we work with here in the Central Valley. And those organizations, as you know, include nonprofit immigration legal services providers, community-based organizations, health advocates, public sector entities of all sorts, K to 12, and also higher education institutions. And the reason for having these webinars is because, like everyone else, we require access to high quality information in order to guide the work that we do in the Central Valley to serve the immigrant families. In this case, we're very privileged to have the opportunity to work with the UCLA Latino Policy and Politics Institute, which has been doing some really wonderful research that has also been made available to people at large. But in particular, they've also been doing some research that has been focused on the Central Valley. So we contacted them. They were eager, very, very willing. I didn't have to convince them at all to do a presentation so they could share the tools, the resources, the information that they are developing that is statewide or also nationwide. Okay, but in particular, also what is useful to us here in the Central Valley. So we're very privileged. I've had conversations with the staff at the Latino Policy and Politics Institute. They are a group of young researchers, high quality work that they're doing. And again, it's a privilege for us to connect with them. So I'd like to introduce both of them to you. We have Rodrigo Dominguez-Villegas. Dr. Villegas, he's the Director of Research at the Latino Policy and Politics Institute. And we also have Rosario Majano, who is a research analyst. They have prepared presentations for us, and we have also been able to ask them to reserve a little bit of time at the end also for Q&A. So you will have an opportunity to ask any questions that you might come to mind about the research, the tools that they're presenting to us. So Rodrigo, Rosario, thank you very much for making this possible, for connecting with our partners here in the Central Valley, again, who come from a very wide variety of organizations, as you can see in the chat box. And it's really a privilege for us to have you join us here virtually with the Central Valley. Take it away.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. So like Jesus mentioned, my name is Rosario, and I'm a research analyst here at the UCLA Latino Policy and Politics Institute. And I'm also joined by one of our research directors, Dr. Rodrigo Dominguez-Villegas. And so we'll introduce ourselves more shortly, but it is a pleasure to be here with you today. We'll be sharing a presentation and engaging in a conversation on building equity with data. And we'll also share some findings from one of our recent publications on the Latino workforce in the Central Valley and provide a hands-on training using the Latino Data Hub. And so for today's agenda, like I mentioned, Rodrigo and I will take a moment to introduce ourselves, and then we'll transition into sharing more information about the Latino Data Hub, or the LDH, and provide a demonstration on how you can take full advantage of the tool. We'll also leave some questions for some time for Q&A before transitioning into sharing some of our research findings, after which we'll also leave some additional time for Q&A and general discussion. And so at this point, I will pass it over to Rodrigo to introduce himself.
Thank you so much, Rosario, and thank you, Jesus, for inviting us here. I'm Rodrigo Dominguez-Villegas. I'm co-director of research at LPPI. I've been at LPPI for about 5.5 years already, and at the very beginning, I was leading the whole set of research portfolios, but now I focus more on directing the research on economic mobility and opportunity, Latino representation and democracy, as well as the Latino Data Hub, about which you're going to be hearing and learning a little bit more. Before I pass it back to Rosario, I did want to say a little bit about our institute. So Latino Policy and Politics Institute is a research institute based at UCLA. And we have 3 pillars for the institute. An important one is research, where we do multi-issue research. We believe that every issue is a Latino issue. But even though we think that every issue is a Latino issue, our staff does have expertise and in specific areas, and those are health, especially access to health insurance and health coverage, um, the environment, economic opportunity and mobility, Latino representation, and what we're calling Latino data infrastructure. So building the data about Latinos across the country. Now, in terms of coverage, we do a lot of our research about California because we're based in California. However, we do some research outside of California too. And as you're going to see in a minute, the Latino Data Hub covers the whole country. A second pillar that's really important for LPPI is our mobilization pillar or policy pillar, which is making sure that all the research that we do and all the research that our over 50 faculty affiliates do get to policymakers, to people like you. That's why we didn't hesitate, Jesus, when Jesus invited us, say, can you present this? You all are precisely the people that we want to reach with the research. And we make a particular effort to make sure that the research that we produce is easy to understand and that it gets to the people that needs to get to. And the third pillar is leadership development, where we have a fellowship program for UCLA undergraduate and graduate students. And that program covers all kinds of different things, but our students graduate with a whole set of skills for them to be the leaders, to be leaders in their communities. Many of our alumni are working at, community-based organizations, at national level organizations. Some of them are in the federal Congress, are staffers in federal Congress, some of staffers in Sacramento in the legislature also. So that's a little bit about our LPPI, and I'll pass it back to Rosario.
Thank you. So I am a research analyst, as I mentioned. I've been at LPPI for about 3.5 years now, and I'm involved in several portfolios, including health, the environment, and economic mobility. My academic background is in public health, but I became interested in worker health and safety during my master's program. And so that area of work touches on all three dockets of work pretty well. I'm also from the Central Valley. I'm specifically from Stockton and San Joaquin County. So I'm especially excited to be here with you all and to talk about the Central Valley today. So thank you again so much for having us, and I will pass it back to Rodrigo.
All right, so as we mentioned the agenda, the first part, we wanted to introduce all of you to an important project that LPPI has, which is called the Latino Data Hub. Many of you, I'm hoping, have been exposed to it, but wanted to tell you a little bit of an overview of what it is, because it goes beyond the data tool that I'm going to showcase in a second. So the Latino Data Hub as a concept started to fill the need to have better data about Latinos in the United States. Really, what led to it was that during the pandemic, we knew as Latinos, we ourselves and as Latino researchers, we knew how the virus was, spreading and was impacting our communities way more than it was impacting other people in the country. However, we saw how slow policymakers were reacting to this, and also how they were pretending like they didn't understand that the people who were most exposed to the virus were the essential workers, which were predominantly Latinos. That then these workers that were mostly that had the highest exposure would go to our multi-generational households and therefore had difficulty stopping the spread of the virus to our family members, that Latinos had less access to health insurance. And so even for those who got it, sometimes it was very difficult to go reach out to the health authorities and so on. And at a moment where agility about data and about knowledge was really important, we realized that that agility did not exist. And so we developed this project, the Latino Data Hub, precisely to fill this gap. But besides the democratizing access to data, which you're seeing in your screens as our first goal, we also have the goals of building organizational data capacity for community-based organizations who are providing incredible services to the community, um, but many times they don't have somebody within their staff who is able to dedicate time to um, analyze the data that you all already collect by talking to your community members or through other means. And so we really want to be there for you all to fill some of that capacity and to be a partner for you all as you collect, analyze, present data, either for fundraising, for community based, for community needs, for instance, justifying the investments that your community and that your work is going into, and then contextualizing the results of that investment. And then a third pillar is about improving data collection standards. So we want to make sure that government agencies are collecting data that really represent Latinos in their complexity and as well as possible. And official government data is having access to that, to disaggregated data, is really important. All right, so another important goal is to change the narratives about Latinos. And for that, we produce research through the Latino Data Hub, and we publish what we call data briefs. Rosario is going to be presenting about one of our many data briefs that is specifically about Latino workers in the Central Valley. But the idea for the data briefs is that we present narrative-ready documents that are very useful for many different audiences, but the media and reporters are able to take these analysis and these shorter form briefs and then turn them into media stories that again show the complexity of Latinos, present us in a positive um, way, in a more nuanced way than what usually the media is, portraying us to do. Here, I'm showing you two examples that you have probably seen in the media. The first one, they really exploded all over social media and so on about the growth of Asian Latinos in the country. The second one was showcasing the fact that Latinas have quadrupled the rate of graduating from college in just 20 years, the fastest growth of any demographic group. Another thing that I want to highlight about the Latino Data Hub is the Data Action Labs, which is the capacity building out for the Latino Data Hub. So I mentioned earlier that the Latino Data Hub is not just the platform that I'm going to show in a second, but also it's about building your capacity of community-based organizations. And for that, we have something called the Data Action Labs. What are Data Action Labs? We basically create learning cohorts depending on different stakeholder groups. The idea is that the cohort will be one that's cohesive and where people are learning from each other, in addition to us facilitating some sessions. Now, the sessions are facilitated through what we call the DNA curriculum model, which has a module on data, a module about narrative, and a module about action, meaning how to collect, present data, to then change narratives, and also to enhance the action, the programming that you all provide. These are adaptive, and we tailor them based on who the participants are going to be. Now, the Data Hub has been out in the world for 2 years. Here are some of the things I did want to present, some of the achievements that we've had. We've had 43,000 unique users in the platform, 68,000 data exploration sessions, over 4,000 media placements, and we've been lucky to reach out to over 100 organizations. And it's also had its impact on policy and community. So, for instance, it was cited in the Grants Pass versus Johnson's case before the Supreme Court to advocate for the rights of unhoused people across the country. There's different mayor's officers that are using it. In California, it's been using a lot to advocate for affordable housing and other policies. And the legislature in California cites data from the Latino Data Hub frequently to advocate for better policies. Right now, something that I mentioned is the importance of disaggregating the data. So what's unique about the Latino Data Hub is that you'll see in a second, you're able to have access to the data in what we call disaggregated level. So here's an important, showcasing why is it important to disaggregate data. So using Imperial County and Rivers County data, for instance, if you were to look at who doesn't have access to broadband internet, you'll see that 15% of all Latinos in this area don't have access to broadband internet. However, if you then disaggregate that by nativity and citizenship, we find that 21% of non-citizens do not have broadband access. Right, so if you disaggregate by citizenship, you uncover more inequities. We have other examples, but I do want to jump into showcasing doing a demonstration of the data instead of just talking about what it is. So if you want to, what I'm going to be doing is showcasing a website and a platform. So if you want to follow along with me, I encourage you to go to latinodatahub.org and you're going to be seeing you should be seeing this website. Now, does it show up as a full screen, Rosario? Are you able to see it well?
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you. So if you go to latinodatahub.org, you land to our homepage. You land on our homepage. Important things to point out here is that on the homepage, you're going to have 3 videos over here that show you how to learn our tools. I also want to point out that Latino Data Hub provides data on 130 different indicators of well-being, which we have grouped under 11 different issue areas. And here are the 11 different issue areas. They range from access to health insurance, to education and language, to transportation. So the homepage is an important resource for you all, especially as you are navigating through the tool. Now, for the sake of time, I'm just going to do an introductory level demo here, but please don't hesitate to reach out to us if you need more training. And I want to do it through our custom graph. Oh, before I do that, todo es bilingüe en el Latino Data Hub. So if you click here, si le dan clic aquí en español, todo está en español. Entonces queríamos asegurarnos que todos tuvieran acceso a los datos que son tan importantes para nuestra comunidad. Por ahora voy a cambiar a inglés. So a way to explore the tool is to go to the custom graphs. I encourage you all to create a profile. That way you can save your work and go back to it, and you can share it in many ways, and you have access to some enhanced capabilities. If you go to custom graphs, you're going to see a completely white canvas. And to start creating a data visualization, I will click on Add Graph. Now, the first thing to do is to choose an indicator. An indicator can be something like, access to broadband internet. That will show you how many people don't have access to the broadband internet. Access to other different things, educational attainment. So we have over 130 different ones. If you click here on the drop-down menu, you're able to see them all. But for demonstration purposes, I'm going to pick an indicator called uninsured. The indicator called uninsured shows you the number and percent of uninsured individuals in the United States. All of our data comes from the US Census Bureau's American Community Survey, and the latest data that we have from there is 2023. Now, as I selected the indicator called uninsured, now I see what percent of each different major racial ethnic group in the US does not have access to health insurance. And as you can see, Latinos and Native Americans are the groups with the largest percentages of people who are uninsured. You can tailor this graph, and you can remove or add on your graph any racial ethnic group that to make your graphic a little bit easier to interpret, you might not want to include in your analysis. An important thing is that we built a lot of guiding features in the Data Hub, including if you hover over a bar, you'll see what we call a tooltip, which will show you a full sentence of what the bar is showing. Right now, this is where it starts, but you can do a lot of more cool things. One of the cool things is that it's a Latino Data Hub, so you're able to see Latino subgroups. And so to customize your selections, you click on the Customize button. That will show you a whole set of options. At the very left, you can change your comparison group from racial ethnic groups to Latino descent groups. And what that means is that what that does is that the data is now comparing across different Latino descent groups. So now you can see the percent who are uninsured for different Latino subgroups. As a default, we have grouped people of Central American descent and South American descent, but you can disaggregate it further by country of origin by selecting over here in these drop-down menus. And you can also remove any group that is not particularly important for your analysis. Now, another thing that you can do is that you can add additional breakdowns. So I'm going to include a breakdown by nativity and citizenship to show you really quickly. When I do that, each group now has 3 bars. The green bar is for non-citizens, the pink is for naturalized citizens, the blue is for those who are US born. And visually, you can very clearly see that those who are non-citizens, there's a much higher percent that don't have access to health insurance. Now, another thing that you can customize is the geography. What geographies do we include? You can find data at the national level, which is where I'm at right now, but you can also find data at the state level by selecting a state over here. So as an example, I'm gonna choose California, and you can dig in deeper and select counties within California. So for instance, I could choose Fresno County. You're also able to combine several counties together, and you do that by selecting several of them. So if I wanted to combine data for Fresno and Alameda County for some reason, I would be able to do that, and the data tool will show you the data. I'm going to remove, sorry. I'm going to select just Fresno County here. We just recently also added congressional districts, and so here you would be able to select congressional districts. As an example, I selected Fresno County. I click Submit. And now you see the data, but only for Fresno County. You're going to see that your title is guiding you through it. It's adjusting based on the things that you chose as a user. All right, I am running out of time. I'm actually a little bit behind. But those are the main features. Well, a few things. As you dig deeper into geographies, you might start finding these NAs. Why do we have NAs? NAs are not applicable, or it means that we didn't have enough people of that specific group or that specific demographic group in the geography that you selected to be able to have a clear and reliable estimate of how many they are and how many have access or don't have access to a specific service or a specific indicator of well-being. And so in Fresno County, the majority of the Latinos are of Mexican descent, and so that's why we don't have a lot of data about people of Cuban descent and so on. Last but not least, as you're selecting things, you can also see your data as a table down here, and you can download this data, and put it in Excel, so that if you're presenting something to your board or to anyone else, and you don't like the colors that the Latino Data Hub produces, and you have a guide, a style guide for your own organization, you can download all the data. The idea is to make all of these as easily accessible as possible and customizable for your needs. If you do like this graph, then you can create, you can click on that button and it creates an image that you can save and then you can share with others. Now, this is just a top line overview of the Latino Data Hub tool, but I do want to remind you all that our team is here to guide you through it. And so if you're going through the Latino Data Hub trying to get data for your own communities, and someone in your team, yourself or someone in your team doesn't know how to navigate certain things, please reach out to us. There is a question mark all throughout the page, which will take you to our contact form. And then we have a team that gets back to people. Usually within 24 hours, we'll respond to anybody who asks the question over there. All right. So with that, I'm going to stop here and provide some room for any questions about the platform. All right. So I don't see any questions coming in through the chat. We remind you that if as we talk, you started having any questions, to please put them in the chat. We will also be doing Q&A right after Rosario presents an overview of our research on the Central Valley. All right. So I'll pass it on to you, Rosario.
Thank you. Right, one sec. Okay, Rodrigo, can you see my slides?
Yes, we can see it.
We can see them.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, so now we'll transition to sharing findings from our recent publication focused on the Latino workforce in the central San Joaquin Valley. And so the majority of the data presented in this brief was pulled using the Latino Data Hub. So this serves as an example of the type of robust storytelling through data that we can do using this tool. And so this publication is actually part of a series of socioeconomic profiles covering the Latino workforce in 5 California regions. We've published profiles on Latino workers in the Central San Joaquin Valley, North San Joaquin Valley, the Inland Empire, the Bay Area, and Los Angeles County. And these profiles are fairly detailed. Each one includes data provided or presented in 26 figures that cover information on labor force participation, unemployment rates, the age and nativity of the workforce, human capital, which includes education and language. We also look at the distribution of workers by industry and occupation. We look at occupational vulnerability due to automation, wages and income, health insurance, and finally, we also include some data on housing. And so from my previous slide, you may have noticed that we decided to study 2 areas within the Central Valley. And so we wanted to provide more nuance to a region of California that is often understudied. And normally what we find is that several counties across, or that span a large area across the state, are collapsed and generalized into a single region referred to as the Central Valley. And so for the following slides, I'll be presenting data on specifically the Central San Joaquin Valley data brief that covers Fresno, Madera, Tulare, and Kings County. And so jumping straight into our findings, this first chart shows that Latinos that are represented by the darker blue are now more than half of the total workforce in the Central San Joaquin Valley. And so as of 2022, 456,000 Latino workers represent 57% of the total workforce in the region. Other information that we can learn from this figure is that from 2000 to 2022, the number of Latino workers increased by 82%. In comparison, non-Latino workers in the region only grew by 2%. And so we can see from this data how important Latinos have become to the labor force of the Central San Joaquin Valley. And so when looking at labor force participation rates by race, ethnicity, and sex, this chart shows that Latino men have the highest rate of labor force participation rate at 69%. They have higher labor force participation rates than Latinas, as well as higher participation rates than workers of major racial and ethnic groups in the region. And within racial groups, we see that the largest gender gap is between Latinos and Latinas. And so one of the reasons that explains the gap is that this data does not do a great job at counting workers in informal economies. And so, for example, if we're thinking of señoras that sell at flea markets, like they may not be captured in this figure. Another reason could be that Latinas are often known for taking on the roles of serving as caretakers for ill and elderly family members. And so even though we recognize this as a full-time job, the census does not always capture these individuals. And so that's just some additional information to help explain why there's such a large gap between Latino men and Latina women when it comes to labor force participation. Next, I want to highlight that when we analyze the workforce by citizenship status, we see that more than 1/3 of Latino workers are immigrants. And so this includes non-citizens and naturalized citizens. And so although Latinos in the region are the second largest share of immigrant workers after Asian and Pacific Island workers, they represent the highest share of workers without citizenship at 25%, compared to workers of other major racial and ethnic groups in the area. And so in addition to understanding the composition of the workforce, of the Latino workforce, we also want to better understand their wages, among other things. And so one of the things that we analyzed was wages by race, ethnicity, and citizenship status. And what we found is that regardless of their status, Latinos working in the Central San Joaquin Valley consistently earn lower wages than employed workers of other racial and ethnic groups. Furthermore, we also saw that employed Latinos who are non-citizens earn the lowest wages of any group at $15 an hour. And so especially in today's political climate, the tenuous and unclear pathway to citizenship for over 1/4 of Latino workers in the region limits access to stable employment, benefits, and career advancement. Next, I want to highlight that when we look at the educational attainment of the labor force in the region, Latinos who are represented by the first row in the chart have lower levels of formal education compared to other racial and ethnic groups. For example, 32% of Latinos in the labor force have less than a high school diploma, and only 13% have a bachelor's degree or higher. This figure was particularly interesting for our team for several reasons. And so one of the things that we discovered when we were looking into educational attainment in the region is that we found that educational attainment rates likely reflect the region's employment landscape, which features a high concentration of jobs that do not necessarily require a college degree. And so, for example, we found that 1 in 5 jobs in the region, and I should say 1 in 5 entry-level positions in the region do not require a bachelor's degree, compared to, for example, 1 in 3 jobs in the Bay Area. And so although the low barrier to entry for employment might be enticing for workers, many of these occupations that include, for example, construction laborers or motor vehicle operators do not always offer competitive wages. They tend to be more physically demanding, and workers in these occupations are also more prone to injuries. And so finally, what we think might explain the low rates of college graduates among the Latino workforce in the region is it could be possibly explained by migration of workers outside of the region into areas that offer more higher paying opportunities. As we did a deeper dive and we found that folks with bachelor's degrees tend to earn less in the Central San Joaquin Valley compared to other parts of California. And so ultimately, lower educational attainment by Latinos in the labor force signals that there's a need to invest in this group of workers to ensure that they're competitive applicants for high paying and high quality jobs. And so this next figure shows the median hourly wages earned by race, ethnicity, and the sex of workers, highlighting that Latinos and Latinas earn less than other racial and ethnic groups. Additionally, Latinas earn the lowest wages overall, earning $16 an hour, which is $12 less than white male workers, who are the highest earning groups of workers in the region, earning $28 an hour. And so despite representing more than half of the Latino workforce in the Central San Joaquin Valley, Latino and Latina workers are significantly underpaid. And so we just saw that Latino workers earn the lowest wages compared to other racial and ethnic groups in the area. And one might think that this could be explained by low levels of formal education among Latino workers, which we also saw a couple slides ago. However, we can use the Latino Data Hub to compare the median hourly wages of workers with a bachelor's degree or higher. And what this shows us is that Latino workers, both men and women, still earn lower wages than other racial and ethnic groups. And so Latinas especially continue to be the most underpaid workers, earning $29 an hour, even when we take into account their educational attainment. Especially notable is the fact that Latina workers with at least a bachelor's degree earn $15 less an hour than white male workers who earn $44 an hour with similar levels of education. And so the gap between the lowest paid workers and the highest paid workers actually widened when we took into account levels of education. And so what this suggests is that Latino workers in the region face structural barriers to obtaining higher earning jobs that go even beyond educational attainment. And so now in this slide, we look at the distribution of workers by industry. And so as you might expect in our profiles, we do a deep dive into understanding the distribution of workers by the type of work that they're employed in. And so beginning by looking at workers, all the workers in the region and comparing them to the distribution of all workers in California, or the two columns on the right, we can see that the distribution of workers in the region generally mirrors that of California, with a couple of exceptions. Compared to the state, workers in the region are more likely to be employed in agriculture and related fields, but they're also less likely to be employed in professional services. To answer Vanessa's question, I believe the presentation will be provided to you afterwards. And so next, if we compare Latino workers in the region to all workers in the region, we can see that Latinos are less likely to work in educational, health, and social services, but are more likely to work in agriculture and related fields, implying that the agriculture sector in the Central Valley is largely powered by Latino workers, which I think we can agree most of us know that intuitively. Finally, when we compare Latinos in the region to Latinos across all of California, we can see that the distribution of Latino workers in the region is similar to workers across the state, with the exception of agriculture, given the fact that the Central Valley is largely characterized by its agricultural industry. Coincidentally, these industries are more likely to implement and rely on automation, which is a good segue into our next slide. And so we found that 39% of Latino workers in the Central San Joaquin Valley have a high risk of being replaced by automation. When looking at our other profiles, we found that Latinos in both Central Valley regions, but specifically the Central San Joaquin Valley, face the highest share of workers employed in a high automation risk occupation. And so examples of occupations at high risk of automation that also have a large share of Latinos include agricultural workers, construction laborers, and freight, stock, and material movers. And so as employers implement more automation, and so examples of this include self-checkout kiosks and self-operating machinery, Latino workers become more vulnerable to job transitions. And so for more information on the impact of automation on Latino workers, we encourage you to check out another one of our reports labeled On the Front Lines, Automation Risks for Latino Workers in California. And so as we wrap up the data portion of this conversation, we'd like to leave you with some of our findings on housing. We looked at home ownership rates among workers as a proxy to financial stability, as home ownership can be an indicator of steady income. And so this figure shows us that more than half of Latino workers in the region, or 53%, own a home compared to 48% of Latino workers in California. And so in fact, what we see is that each racial and ethnic group in the Central San Joaquin Valley is more likely to be a homeowner in the region compared to their respective California counterparts. However, like in California, home ownership rates for Latino workers in the region are much lower than home ownership rates of, for example, white or Asian and Pacific Islander workers. And so this tells us that although home ownership in the region is more attainable, racial disparities in the region still exist. Furthermore, our other findings with regard to housing showed us that homes owned by Latino workers are valued lower than those owned by white and AAPI workers. Latino workers also experience higher rates of overcrowded housing, which means that there are more individuals living in a home than there are rooms in that particular home. We also saw that Latino workers experience high rates of housing cost burdens, whether they are renting or whether they're owning. And so together, these findings tell us that there are structural barriers in accessing affordable, high-quality housing, and they underscore the importance and the need for housing policies that address affordability, overcrowding, and pathways to home ownership, especially for Latino communities, but for all working communities. And so that was a lot of information, but now we can take a pause and open it up to discussion and answer any questions, whether it's about the data brief or it's about the Latino Data Hub.
Thank you very much, Rosario and Rodrigo. Really valuable information. We'd like to open up now for question and answer. You can request being unmuted or unmute yourself if you can, please. If you have any question, comment for Rodrigo and Rosario, please raise your hand.
Oh, I can answer Marciela's question. And so for this particular data brief, we presented, or the counties that were represented in the data include Fresno, Madera, Tulare, and Kings County.
Yes. And earlier, throughout the presentation, Alberto Villaleva asked a few specific questions about the Latino Data Hub. First is, what is the minimum sample size per county? So we don't report on any population group that has a sample size of less than 100 in the county. That is to make sure that we are protecting people's privacy. The second is, how are the surveys conducted: by phone, in person, online, door to door, or through other data collection methods? And actually, the U.S. Census Bureau utilizes all of these methods. So if you've participated in the decennial census, and many of you got either something mailed to you and then you had to fill it out and send it back, or a little card that would take you to an online website, like a website, and then you would be able to answer questions about the survey. Sometimes when people don't answer, there's also surveyors that go and ask questions and ask the questions in person. So it's a combination of methodology. The idea is that the Census Bureau wants to try to reach as many people as possible. The American Community Survey um, every year collects data from 1% of the US population.
Thank you, Rodrigo. Alejandro Gonzalez, you can unmute yourself. I unmuted you.
Alejandro, if you're talking, we can't hear you.
No, we're good. Thank
Oh,
you.
there you go.
Other questions? I do have some both for our presenters and also for our colleagues who joined us, but I'll allow a few more seconds. Vanessa?
Yeah, so Vanessa, thanks for the question. I see it in the chat. Vanessa is asking, how often does the data update to recording the statistics? This one is from 2022. And here's an important answer. So the data on the Latino Data Hub gets updated every year and gets released. The new data gets released around June of every year. We are usually, for lack of a better term, 2 years behind. Why? Because the data, for instance, right now you'll see data in the Data Hub in the platform itself, data for 2023. Why are we 2 years behind? Because it takes some time for the U.S. Census Bureau to go out, collect the data, then record it, and then make it available for the public. Now, in this specific profile that is authored by Miguel Hernandez and Alberto Vargas and Rosario and others, the data does come from the 2022 American Community Survey, mostly because we started writing that data brief right before we updated the platform. And so it came out a little bit after we had updated the platform, but we had put it together on a nice data brief right before. And to answer the question specifically, we update it every year. So yeah.
Thank you, Rodrigo. Other colleagues have questions, whether specific or general in nature? I do have a comparative question. You gave us a good overview, Rosario, of the situation of Latinos here in the Central Valley, at least the south central part of the Central Valley. In general, given all the research that you have done just here in California, with California-based Latinos, how would you compare the general conditions and barriers that Latinos in the Central Valley face to achieve socioeconomic mobility? What are the greatest disparities that you find between the Central Valley Latinos and Latinos that are elsewhere in other parts of the state?
That's a really good question. I think, after we looked at the data for across the different regions, what we found is that the larger narrative in the Central Valley is that folks there they're working poor. So despite having incredibly high rates of labor force participation, they're just not getting as much on the return of like labor investment as compared to, for example, folks in the Bay Area or folks in Los Angeles. And the reason why we think that is because there's just not as many opportunities for employment in the Central Valley. And so whether that's Northern or whether that's Central San Joaquin Valley. And so again, unfortunately, although we do see high rates of labor force participation, folks just aren't earning as much. And so what that leads to is, I believe the term is like brain drain. And so even though so thinking about some of the other research that we've done using the Latino Data Hub and some of the research that we also did for these briefs is that we see that Latinas are actually more likely to go to college than Latino men. But what we suspect is happening is that they're migrating outside of the area. And so it's kind of like a chicken or egg, because if you have folks who have college degrees but they're leaving the area, then it's like, well, we need an incentive to keep them here, but as long as that incentive isn't there, then there's a chance that they might keep leaving. And if they're leaving, then the folks that are left are folks who maybe have lower levels of education and have lower access to higher paying jobs. And so that's part of the larger narrative. I'll also leave it or open it up to you, Rodrigo, if you want to add to it.
I think you covered the most important things that were different. It is important to highlight though. So this is Latinos in the Central San Joaquin Valley versus Latinos across California. That's what's happening. What Rosario mentioned. It's important to also highlight that regardless of the area in California, we found huge pay disparities between Latinos and non-Latinos, and particularly for Latinas, right? And so part of the presentation, Rosario part of the information Rosario presented was on that wage disparity. But unfortunately, that disparity and Latinas being the lowest paid group is something that happens all across California.
Yeah. Thank you both. Rosario, the information you just share right now in response to my question, I think it's really alarming to us here in the Central Valley, but it also coincides very well with studies that have been conducted by another agency at UC Riverside, the California 100. They have reports where they analyze the characteristics of different regions within California. And one of the things they highlight in one of the report is that the dominant industries in the Central Valley really do not permit for much socioeconomic mobility. So what you're stating to us right now, based on the research that you are carrying out, also really confirms that we have to transform the economy in the Central Valley to also make those opportunities available to the people who live here, and also in particular to Latinos. But I'll stop there just to really um, underscore the importance of what you mentioned. Eleazar, do you want to unmute yourself?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hey, okay. I just wanted to see, you talk about, the Latinas have better education than males. What about the pay scale? Is that still higher for Latinas too?
So we do have a figure in the brief. I can show it briefly. So we do have a figure in the brief in which we look at the median hourly wage, and we break this apart by sex, and we also break it apart by industry. And so generally what we saw is that regardless of the industry, Latino men still continue to earn more than Latina women. What we did find, and we don't have a specific chart for this broken down, but you can find this information in the Latino Data Hub, is that we found that women in the region, or Latina women, were more likely to hold a bachelor's degree. And despite this, when we look at the combination of bachelor's degree, we look at wages, we look at industry, we look at sex, at race, Latina women still continue to get paid less than Latino men. And so again, this is indicative of larger like structural issues when it comes to accessing higher paying, higher quality jobs.
Thank you.
Vanessa, would you like to unmute yourself?
I'll unmute myself. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so my question was earlier to what you actually said, Mr. Martinez, to them. Um, it was during like your guys' talk, a question like popped up into my mind, right? And in your insight, meaning in Dr. Rodrigo's and Rosario's insight, what would be the primary goal to achieve as a community for these numbers to increase for the better? Or is this just a systematic issue with labor of the state or governmental policy slash administration? So it's more like a, in your perspective type of question.
Yeah, and I think this is a really big question. It's a really important one. And I think it can be tackled from both angles. I believe I might be misspeaking on the exact locality, but I believe Long Beach recently passed an ordinance to ban self-checkout kiosks to try to, using policy, stop the rollout of automation. And so it's both from a policymakers have a responsibility to taking a stand against automation and folks potentially losing their jobs. I think from a community perspective or more on the ground, it's trying to help folks keep up with the advancement of technology, which gets harder and harder every year because every year the advancement of technology is exponential. So it's not like they're having to learn how to use like Microsoft, it's also having to learn how to use like Microsoft AI and Google AI. And so it's on the issue needs to be addressed on multiple fronts. I do want to give Rodrigo a chance to answer, and so I'll leave it at that for now.
Yeah, thanks, Rosario. So I want to broaden the answer a little bit. I think there's two important things that the briefs highlight, answering on like what is our primary goal to achieve as a community for these numbers to increase for the better. The two angles are, first, reducing the disparities, right, across different groups. That is showing some systemic discrimination, a whole bunch of different things that are happening in the background, structural inequalities that need to be closed within each region in California. The second is, how do we make sure that all regions in California are growing economically so that people, regardless of the racial ethnic background, have an opportunity, going back to what Jesus was saying, to have economic mobility, to have that, to be able to live lives with dignity, with their families in a place that they call home and that they have built community, and they don't need they don't see themselves forced to migrate somewhere else or to go or to make it choices without or to make decisions without our choice. So those are pretty important things, right? Like within the region is closing those racial disparities, and then across regions, encouraging policies that promote equitable growth for everybody.
Thank you both. Alejandro also had a comment regarding AI, which is related to the discussion on automation as well. And there's a really wonderful report that you produced earlier this year, and I was privileged enough to be invited to its presentation in Sacramento back in January, February. So I really encourage everyone to visit the website and take a look at that document as well. Eddie Zamora, you also have a question. You can unmute yourself as well.
Thank you, and thank you for being on today. I've checked out the Latino Data Hub previously, and it's a lot of great information. Just a kind of unique question. I didn't see any information in terms of the impact that having a low-cost bank account, either with a credit union or a bank, has on the Latino community. I have kind of a unique role where I take a mobile branch, a diesel truck, a branch on wheels out to different communities, and some of which are all over in very remote areas of the Central Valley and a lot of the same counties that you're looking at here today. And I'll tell you that I think, having that ability to have access to low cost or no cost financial institutions, you kind of see a stair step building. They get kind of the foundational knowledge, education, checking, savings, things like that. Then they, progress onto building credit and, from there, home ownership, small business, and more. Is there any thoughts about having that information as well in terms of the number of people that are banked versus unbanked, or credit unions, or whatever it may be, versus going to a check casher, in terms of the overall stability of the families that you're taking a look at?
Thank you so much for that question, Eddie. So the answer to your question is yes. For now, so in terms of access to different financial services, we are hoping to add another issue area that we're going to be calling the wealth issue area. That's going to be, because as you mentioned, Eddie, like having access to the first bank account is the path, like many times is the path for wealth building. In the meantime, I do want to point out we are partnered with another great data platform that's called the Blackwell Data Center. And you might be able to find some of the indicators that you're mentioning for your community there. I put the website on the chat, in the chat. And I want to take advantage of this question to also say that a few things that the Latino Data Hub doesn't have right now is these indicators on wealth. We also don't have indicators on health outcomes. So things like cancer rates or rates of diabetes, and so on. And that's another thing that we're working on. But I also want to mention that questions like yours, Eddie, are really important for us so that we can understand what to prioritize and what to add to the Data Hub. We are frequently adding new things. And for instance, working with partners that we're working on services for people with disabilities, made us add an 11th issue area, which is just focused on disability, for instance.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. And I will tell you, in one community in particular, Mendota, California, it's been fascinating to see a credit union go in, mobile, to see the impact and the response and the need that's there, especially by Spanish speakers. So it's been absolutely fascinating to watch, and gives me a lot of pride in the work that I do, but also in terms of just fascinating to see the impact that something as taking the services directly on a diesel truck there can have on the community. So, and thank you for all the information that you're providing.
Thank you very much, Eddie. Any last question or comment as we're going a little bit over time?
I do have another question. Sorry.
Go
I know
ahead,
we're
please.
running out of time. However, for the pay gap, right, that's a huge issue and just all across the board. It's not just for Latinos, it's also for whites, it's also for Asian Pacific Islanders, and so on and so on. Now, for California specifically, in October 16 of this year, there was a bill that was signed, the SB 642, um, Limon, I think. It's the Pay Equity Enforcement Act into law. Do you guys believe that that bill will have an impact into the data um, in the upcoming years?
That is an important question. And I think it's an important step towards that. But it is something that, us as an institute, we like to track the progress of these bills. And yeah, so to answer your question, I'm not 100% sure exactly what what the outcome of this bill is gonna be. But our institute, tracks the outcomes in terms of pay equity to understand whether policies are working or not.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us for this very valuable webinar. And in particular, obviously, we would like to thank Rosario and Rodrigo for taking the time, the effort to make this possible, to help us in the Central Valley better understand the tools and the information that you are generating. And as was also very evident throughout the presentation, your own analysis of all this data that you're sharing with us today and you make available to the data portal. This is really important to us, and I appreciate and thank you very much for making it possible for us to be with you. And thank you everyone who joined us today. Hope you have a great day. Take care, everyone.